All right, guys, our guest tonight is WWE Hall of Famer, former governor of Minnesota, television host, author, man of many hats, Jesse Ventura. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing okay.
Well, listen, the first edition of your book, American Conspiracies, was a New York Times bestseller, and you have released the second edition that is already making waves. Why was now the right time to release the new American Conspiracies, and what are you hoping to accomplish with this book that you didn't with the first?
Well, first of all, I didn't choose to re-release it. My Skyhorse Publishing wanted to do an updated version, and I said, fine, I have no problem with that. So we released a new version with 4 new conspiracies because generally the way our government operates, you could probably get a conspiracy a year from them because they're going to do something they don't want you to know about. They're going to cover it up with the cloak of national security, and then, of course, you have to uncover it to find out what bad things they're doing now.
Mike Chiari?
Yeah, well, you're very well known, obviously, for your time as Minnesota governor. And you've expressed some interest in potentially running for president in 2016 as a libertarian candidate. Why might you consider throwing your hat into the ring, and why do you think you would have success if you did ultimately decide to do that?
Well, if you look at the situation right now, there's the start of a revolution happening here. You can see it in the Republican Party right now because their 3 leaders have never held office before. They're private sector people, the people that are leading the Republican polls. And you're watching these 2 parties disintegrate in their own way before your eyes, which is good. Now, come next springtime, the Pikers will be out. They'll be down to 2 people, and it's next spring that the Libertarians name their candidate. You go to the Libertarian Convention, they vote you as their candidate, and then from June through November, you'll be on the ballot in probably 47 or 48 states throughout the United States. And then the key would be to get into the debates because you've got to be in the debates in order to have a chance to win. But you need to wait. In my case, if I'm going to do it, you wait until they get rid and get down to 1 apiece each side, because then you save money and you're not spinning your wheels and wasting your time.
Well, Donald Trump, he's undoubtedly the most polarizing figure in the presidential race currently. What are your overall impressions of Donald Trump and his presidential qualifications?
Well, Donald Trump was actually a supporter of me way back in the days of the Reform Party in the 90s. So I've known Donald for 20, 25 years now, back to the WrestleMania 4 and 5 and all that. And Donald's always threatened to run, but he's never gone through with it. This time he's gone through with it, and he's in for the long haul. But the problem is, if he doesn't get the Republican nomination, what happens to all the people that would vote for him? Do they then just go back to the normal Republican, or will they look for something else? The same thing can be said about Bernie Sanders. He's an independent infiltrating the Democrats. He won't get the nomination either. And what will happen to all his voters? Where will they go? Will they simply go back to the Democratic Party? I don't think so. And then when you look at the whole nation, last national election, only 64% of the people chose not to vote. That's nearly 2/3 of the public did not vote. Well, those are potential customers for me if I run, because that's how I won in Minnesota, by getting people that didn't normally vote coming out to get them to vote.
Brandon Galvin?
My father is an avid follower of politics and often relates it to professional sports because of the anything can happen nature and intensity. I'm curious if wrestling or politics gave you a greater thrill or rush.
Well, when I taught at Harvard in 2004, excuse me, I actually did a class called How Pro Wrestling Prepares You for Politics. And it truly does, because you have to be able to talk on a mic. You have to be able to think on your feet, because in a match, anything that can go wrong, Murphy's Law will go wrong. So you have to be prepared for that. And plus the fact that in many ways in wrestling, the character you portray may be nothing like what you really like in real life. And I find that's true with these politicians. Most of them are playing a role much like a wrestler. They're not like that in real life. They're simply playing before the audiences to get elected.
Well, in addition to your many books, you're also hosting Aura TV's Off the Grid. Tell the fans who have never seen the show before what to expect when tuning in, and where and when they can find the program.
Well, it's on Aura.tv, which is on the internet. It's on all Monday through Friday or whatever. I don't keep track of all that. And I'm off the grid when I do it. What you're going to get you're going to get Jesse Ventura in a 10 to 11 minute basic, like a wrestling interview on any subject. But it turns me loose since it's on the internet. There's no FCC regulations. I'm in total control of my show, and it's the most fun I've ever had doing a show.
Mike Chiari?
Yeah, well, switching gears over to wrestling a little bit, your history with Hulk Hogan is pretty well documented, and he's been in the news a lot lately, obviously, because of his falling out with WWE due to a racial slur scandal. So having known Hogan dating back many years, what was your reaction when you heard about that scandal?
Well, maybe the people are seeing the real Hulk Hogan. You know, let's all remember something, that we all play parts in wrestling, and we may be nothing like what we are in real life. Maybe you're seeing what Hogan is in real life here. I'm only speculating on that, but bear that in mind, that, like we used to always laugh when he'd tell the little kids to say their prayers and eat their vitamins. We'd always laugh and go, orals or injectables? What kind of vitamins we talking here? Because I remember when Hogan denied he ever used steroids. That's a laugh.
Brandon Gavin?
Well, American Conspiracies was obviously a big hit, and I'm sure the revised edition will be another. Have you considered writing a book about wrestling conspiracies, and is there any from the business you recall that you could share with us?
Not really. I left wrestling in 1990, and I really didn't look back. And I continue with that today. I don't watch it today. I don't even know who wrestles today. And my life moved on. And as far as writing a book about wrestling, I have no interest in that, because there's been plenty of books. Plenty of guys have written books, and I would just be joining a list of many. And I don't think there's anything that I know that these other guys haven't already wrote about, or things that they don't know. I guess, I could have fun with it. I was actually on Vern Gagne's plane the night that Mad Dog Vachon opened the door at 10,000 feet. That was exciting.
that would be cool. That would be quite enthralling for sure. Well, you mentioned Vern Gagne. That leads to my question here. During your career, you got to work with and against amazing legends like Vern Gagne, Adrian Adonis, Bob Backlund, many others. In the ring, who had the biggest influence on you? And outside the ring in the wrestling industry, who had the biggest influence on you?
Well, I said when I went into the Hall of Fame, the two guys I most liked to wrestle, who we really had great chemistry, was Tito Santana and Jimmy Snuka. And, those were the two guys that I really enjoyed every night I wrestled with them. Because, we just had chemistry. And as far as who influenced me in wrestling, well, Vince did in many ways. I'll never forget when I was doing taping with him, and I looked at him one day and I said, Vince, the key to this business is to go get famous at something else and come back to it, isn't it? And Vince kind of looked over at me and says, you're learning. So what did I do? I went off and did Predator. I did The Running Man. I became famous at something else. And then I came back to wrestling. And Vince was absolutely correct when he said that.
Mike Chiari?
Yeah, well, you and Gorilla Monsoon were the voices of WWF throughout the late 1980s, and I think you played off each other so well with your favoritism for the heels and then his straight-laced style. But why do you feel like you had such good chemistry with Gorilla, and what was your level of enjoyment working side by side with him for so many big events?
Well, I enjoyed it. Gino was a terrific person, and he was good on the mic because he let me be me. He knew his job. He knew he had to be the straight man. He knew he had to be the guy who called it down the middle. And it was a complete enjoyment, just as it was when I got kicked up in Saturday Night Main Event, and I do it with Vince. Because many of those years wasn't just with Gorilla. I did them with Vince, too. And I thought the chemistry was great on both. I believe there'll never be announcing teams that will ever rise to the level of Gorilla and me and Vince and I. And I'm proud of that fact, and I'll argue with anybody that we were the best there was.
Well, sticking with your announcing career, your stint as an announcer with WCW was somewhat short-lived from 92 to 94, and there's been a lot of speculation over the years why you and WCW parted ways. So what's the real story regarding that situation?
Well, the real story was when they brought me in, they paid me big money because I was a chump from the WWF, and a lot of people couldn't handle the money I was being paid to just be an announcer, Bill Watts included, who was then later the head guy booker or whatever. And I think Jim Ross was very jealous because Ross wouldn't work with me. You know, I'd throw him lines and he wouldn't respond to it, and he even admitted it, that he didn't do the best job in the world when he worked with me at WCW. And I think Jim was jealous of the money I was getting, which wasn't my fault. He shouldn't blame me for it. But so there never was the chemistry there with Jim Ross that I had with Vince or with Gorilla, Gino. And then the other thing was the reason it ended up like it did, they brought Hogan in, and Hogan immediately had me dismissed. Because I remember I still had 6 months to go on my contract, and I never had to work. They just paid me, and I sat at home. Because Hulk Hogan came in, and Hulk Hogan did not want Jesse Ventura on the mic there, and he had the power to do it. So they Eric Bischoff, that little, I got a few names for him, but the backstabber Eric Bischoff. You know, I never worked my last 6 months as soon as Hogan was brought in.
Brandon Galvin, final question?
Well, we often discuss how poor the commentary has been in wrestling recently, and consider you one of the best to have done it. I know you said earlier that you don't watch the product today, but have you ever considered a return to that role for WWE?
No, I've never considered it because Vince would never have me. A lot of people have asked when the old timers come back to WrestleMania and all that. Many people said, Governor, Jesse Ventura, why are you never at a WrestleMania? Well, when I went to federal court with Vince and beat him, if I were to go to a WrestleMania and he were to tape it and sell the tape, he has to pay me royalties. So Vince will never want to pay me any more royalties. So I don't think you will ever see Jesse Ventura at a WrestleMania. It won't be my choice. It's because Vince does not like to pay me because I beat him in federal court. And it's still probably a burr under. You know how Vince is. He don't like to get beat by nobody.
A huge thank you to Jesse Ventura. Go check out the second edition of the American Conspiracies book and check out his show Off the Grid on Aura.tv.
Thank you. Appreciate it very much. You guys have a good one.